At 2:17 a.m., I woke up to a bank alert saying someone had just spent $12,400 on my credit card. I thought it had to be fraud. Then I walked into the kitchen and found my husband's sister calmly shopping online with my wallet sitting right beside her. When I demanded an explanation, my father-in-law laughed and said, "She's family. Stop making such a big deal out of it." They all thought I'd forgive her. None of them knew I'd already done something that was about to change every one of their lives. For a few seconds, I honestly couldn't process what I was looking at. The glow from the laptop lit up my sister-in-law's face as she clicked through another luxury shopping website like it was any other Tuesday night. Designer handbags, jewelry, a weekend spa package. The total sitting in the corner of the screen made my stomach drop. I looked down at the wallet beside her elbow. My wallet. The same one I'd left in my purse before going to bed. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't even jump. She looked up at me with complete confidence. "Oh, you're awake." As if I'd caught her eating the last slice of pizza, instead of spending thousands of dollars that weren't hers. I walked over, grabbed my wallet, and looked inside. Every card was still there. My hands were shaking. "You used my credit card." She shrugged. "I needed it." "You needed $12,400? Before she could answer, footsteps came from the hallway. My father-in-law walked into the kitchen, wearing sweatpants and carrying a mug of coffee, like he'd expected to find us there. He glanced between us once. Then he laughed. "She's family," he said. "Stop making such a big deal out of it." I stared at him. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me. She stole my credit card." "No," he corrected. "She borrowed it. I never gave her permission." He waved his hand dismissively. "It's all staying in the family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. About 6 months earlier, my father-in-law had moved into our house after selling his condo. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary. My husband's younger sister had followed 2 months later, after saying she needed a fresh start. Temporary somehow turned into permanent. Our quiet home slowly stopped feeling like ours. They rearranged furniture without asking, helped themselves to groceries, turned the television up until midnight, used my shampoo, used my car whenever they felt like it. Every time I complained, my husband had the same answer. "They're family." I kept compromising because I loved him. I convinced myself things would improve. Instead, they got worse. Now I was standing in my own kitchen at 2 in the morning, watching his sister casually spend money that could have covered half a year's mortgage payments. I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the bank." My sister-in-law finally looked nervous. "You don't have to be dramatic." "Dramatic?" My father-in-law folded his arms. "If you report this, you're going to create problems for everyone." "No," I said quietly. "She created those problems when she took my card." At that exact moment, my husband walked downstairs. His hair was a mess. He looked exhausted. "What's going on?" I looked at him, hoping, honestly hoping, he would immediately understand how insane this situation was. Instead he frowned at his sister. "How much did you spend?" "12,400. He let out a slow breath. "That's a lot." "A lot?" I repeated. "She stole my card." His sister crossed her arms. "I said I'd pay it back." "With what?" I asked. "You haven't had a full-time job in over a year." She glared at me. "I'll figure it out." I looked back at my husband. "Tell me you don't think this is okay." He rubbed his face. "I'm not saying it's okay. But maybe we can solve this without making it bigger." There it was. The word I'd grown to hate. Maybe, let it go. Maybe she's stressed. Maybe don't ruin the family. Maybe next time will be different. There was always another maybe. Never accountability. Never consequences. I called the bank anyway. The representative froze the card immediately and began reviewing the transactions. Some had already processed. Others were still pending. I requested that every unauthorized purchase be disputed. My sister-in-law shot up from her chair. "You can't do that." "I absolutely can. Those orders are for me." "Exactly." The bank representative calmly explained that a fraud investigation would begin. I thanked her and ended the call. The kitchen fell silent. My father-in-law looked furious. "You actually reported your own family?" "No," I answered. "I reported unauthorized charges. Those are two very different things." The next morning, the house felt unusually quiet. No one spoke during breakfast. My husband kept looking between me and his family, like he was hoping somebody else would fix everything. Finally, he asked if we could talk privately. We stepped into the backyard. He sighed before saying anything. "I wish you'd talk to me first." "I did. I mean, before calling the bank. I found your sister using my card in the middle of the night." "I know. And your father defended her." "I know. So, what exactly was there left to discuss?" He didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "What happens if the investigation gets serious?" I stared at him. "It already is serious." He looked genuinely conflicted. "I don't want my sister getting into legal trouble. I didn't want her emptying my credit limit." Silence stretched between us. Then he quietly asked, "Would you consider withdrawing the report?" That hurt more than I expected. Not because he asked, because he already knew the answer. No. Over the next few days, the atmosphere inside the house became unbearable. My sister-in-law stopped pretending she'd done nothing wrong. Instead, she became openly hostile. She slammed doors, ignored me, complained loudly on the phone about me, where she knew I'd hear. I can't believe she's doing this over money. Over money, not over trust, not over theft. Money. My father-in-law joined in. He repeatedly reminded my husband how families should stick together. Every conversation somehow ended with me being described as cold, unforgiving, or selfish. No one ever described his daughter's actions that way. One evening, I walked into the kitchen and heard him telling my husband, "Marriage is about sacrifice." I waited. Then he added, "Sometimes your wife needs to learn that." I turned around before either of them noticed I'd heard. That sentence stayed with me. Because suddenly I realized something. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as the person expected to sacrifice for everyone else. The bank called 3 days later. An investigator asked several questions. Did I authorize the purchases? No. Did anyone have permission to use my card? No. Did I know who made the purchases? Yes. There was a long pause. The representative remained professional. She explained the next steps without offering opinions. When the call ended, I felt strangely calm. Not because things were getting easier. Because for the first time since that night, someone had treated the situation exactly as seriously as it deserved. That evening, my sister-in-law cornered me in the laundry room. "You know what your report is doing?" "I do. You could ruin my future. You should have considered that before taking my wallet." "I thought you'd understand." "Why?" "Because we're family." I looked at her. "No. We're family because I married your brother. Trust is something else entirely." Her expression hardened. "So you're really willing to destroy this family?" I shook my head slowly. "I didn't steal from this family." She stormed away without another word. A week passed. The investigation continued. Several of the purchases had been canceled before shipping. Others had already been delivered. The bank requested additional documentation. I cooperated fully. Meanwhile, something else began happening. Little things around the house started disappearing. My favorite coffee mug. A necklace my grandmother had given me. A set of expensive kitchen knives. Every time I asked about them, nobody knew anything. Maybe I'd misplaced them. Maybe I'd forgotten where I put them. Maybe I was imagining things. That word again. Maybe. One afternoon, I found my grandmother's necklace sitting on my sister-in-law's dresser. When I picked it up, she walked into the room. "Why are you in here? I could ask you the same thing about my jewelry." She didn't even deny wearing it. "I was borrowing it." I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because apparently, everything I owned had somehow become community property. I took the necklace back without another word. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything that had happened over the previous months. The missing groceries. The unexplained charges. The borrowed car. The disappearing belongings. The constant excuses. Individually, each incident had seemed small enough to overlook. Together, they painted a completely different picture. I quietly opened my laptop. Not to argue. Not to search for advice. To review something I'd almost forgotten. Months earlier, long before that night in the kitchen, I had started documenting every unusual financial issue in the house. Dates, receipts, photos, copies of account statements. Not because I expected things to reach this point, because something had never felt quite right. At the time, I told myself I was probably overthinking. Looking at the folder now, I realized I hadn't been overthinking anything. I had been noticing a pattern. And that pattern was much bigger than a single credit card. I sat back in my chair and stared at the growing collection of records. Then my phone buzzed. It was a notification from my email. The bank had sent an update. I opened it immediately. Halfway through reading the message, I heard footsteps outside my office door. Someone stopped just outside. The doorknob slowly began to turn. And in that moment, I realized whoever was standing on the other side had no idea what I had just discovered. The doorknob turned another inch before the door slowly opened. It was my husband. He looked exhausted. Not angry, not defensive, just tired. "I saw the light on," he said quietly. "Can we talk?" I minimized the folder on my laptop before he could see it. "Sure." He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't think I've handled any of this well." I didn't argue, because he hadn't. "I've been trying to keep everyone together," he continued. "And in the process you've asked me to accept things you never would have accepted yourself." He lowered his eyes. "I know." That surprised me, not because he admitted it, because it was the first time he'd admitted it without following it with an excuse. "I need you to tell me something honestly," I said. He nodded. "Did you know your sister had used my credit card before that night?" His head came up immediately. "No." "Not once?" "No." I watched his face carefully. I'd been married to him long enough to recognize when he was lying. This wasn't one of those times. He looked genuinely shocked that I'd even asked. "I knew she'd borrowed little things," he admitted. "What little things?" "My dad told me she'd used your grocery card once because she'd forgotten hers." "My grocery card? I thought you knew." I stared at him. "I never knew." His expression slowly changed. It wasn't just surprise anymore. It was realization. "What else didn't I know?" he asked quietly. I turned my laptop back toward me. Then I opened the folder I'd been reviewing. "I think it's easier if I show you." For nearly 30 minutes, we sat side by side. Every receipt, every unexplained purchase, every missing item, every photograph I'd taken after finding things moved around the house, every bank statement highlighting transactions I couldn't explain, every date, every note. As we reached the end, he leaned back in his chair. "Oh my God! I thought I was imagining it." He slowly shook his head. "They've been doing this for months. I think longer." He buried his face in his hands. "I kept telling you they were family." "You did." I was wrong. Those 3 words meant more than he probably realized. Not because they erased everything, because they showed me he was finally seeing what I'd been living with. Then his eyes landed on the email from the bank. "What did they send?" I handed him the laptop. He read it once, then again. "They found additional transactions." I nodded. The investigation expanded. The original $12,000 charge had prompted the bank to review recent activity. During that review, investigators had flagged several older purchases that followed the same pattern. Smaller amounts, different dates, different merchants, all originating from devices connected to our home internet. The total wasn't $12,000 anymore. It was considerably more. I felt sick every time I looked at the number. Not because of the money, because every transaction represented another moment someone I lived with had decided my trust was theirs to spend. My husband looked physically ill. I had no idea. I believe you. But I should have. The next morning, he asked his father and sister to sit down in the living room. Nobody realized how different this conversation was going to be. My father-in-law smiled confidently. "Has your wife finally calmed down?" My husband didn't answer. Instead, he placed several printed bank statements on the coffee table. His sister looked at them for only a second, before her face lost all color. "What are these?" "You tell me." She looked toward their father. He remained silent. My husband continued. "The bank found more than the $12,000 purchase." His sister swallowed. They found months of unauthorized transactions. Nobody spoke. Finally, my father-in-law cleared his throat. "There must be some misunderstanding." "There isn't." My husband's voice stayed remarkably calm. "The timestamps match devices in this house." His sister immediately became defensive. She never complained before. I couldn't believe she actually said that. "I didn't know," I answered. She looked away. That tiny reaction told me everything. She had counted on me never noticing. Then something happened that I honestly hadn't expected. My husband looked directly at his father. "Did you know?" The room became painfully quiet. His father didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly leaned back. "It wasn't stealing." My husband repeated the question. "Did you know?" A long silence followed. Finally, he nodded once. "I knew she'd use the cards." My husband looked like someone had punched him. "You told me she borrowed grocery money." "I didn't want unnecessary drama." "You lied to me." "I protected the family." "No." My husband's voice cracked. "You protected bad behavior." I had never seen him speak to his father that way before. His father noticed too. "You don't talk to me like that." "I do now." His sister suddenly burst into tears. "I was going to pay it back." "When?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer. My husband asked the question instead. "With what money?" "Nothing." She had no answer. Because there wasn't one. The next several days were a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and meetings with the bank. Eventually, they completed their investigation. The fraudulent charges were formally documented. The disputed transactions were resolved according to the bank's process, and the evidence that had been gathered. It wasn't fast. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply thorough. Exactly the way something this serious should be handled. At home, things changed even faster. For the first time since they'd moved in, my husband stopped asking me to compromise. Instead, he looked around the house and quietly said, "This doesn't feel like our home anymore." "It hasn't for a long time." He nodded. "I know." A few days later, he sat down with his father and sister. "This arrangement is over." Neither of them seemed to understand. "You need to find somewhere else to live." His father's eyes widened. "You're kicking out your own family?" "I'm protecting my marriage." His sister immediately looked at me. "This is what you wanted." I shook my head. "No. What I wanted was to feel safe in my own house." "Those aren't the same thing." Moving day came 2 weeks later. Nobody yelled. Nobody threw things. The silence was somehow heavier. As the last box disappeared into their car, my father-in-law stopped in front of my husband. "You're making a mistake." My husband answered without hesitation, "No. I made the mistake when I expected my wife to tolerate things I never should have tolerated." His father had no response. He simply got into the car. They drove away without looking back. The house felt strangely empty afterward. Not lonely. Peaceful. For the first time in months, I left my purse on the kitchen counter without thinking about it. I didn't hide my wallet. I didn't wonder where my belongings were. I didn't double-check every bank notification with a knot in my stomach. I'd forgotten what normal felt like. One evening, my husband apologized again. Not the quick apology he'd given before. A real one. "I kept asking you to keep the peace." "You did. But the peace only existed because you were paying for it." I looked at him. "I needed you to see it." "I finally do." He reached across the table and took my hand. "I can't change how long it took." "I know. But I'll spend the rest of our marriage making sure it never happens again." For the first time in weeks, I believed him. Months passed. Life became wonderfully ordinary. Then one afternoon my phone buzzed. It was a message from my sister-in-law. I hadn't heard from her since she moved out. The message was short. "I'm sorry." No excuses. No blaming me. No mention of family. Just those 2 words. I stared at them for a long time before replying. "I hope you're doing better." She answered a few minutes later. "I finally got a job. I'm paying off my debts." I should have taken responsibility a long time ago. I wished her well. Forgiveness didn't require forgetting. It simply meant I wasn't going to carry that anger forever. My father-in-law never apologized. As far as I know, he still believes everything would have been fine if I'd simply ignored it. Maybe that's what he needs to believe. I can't control that. What I can control is what I allow into my own life. Looking back now, people sometimes ask me whether the money was ever the real issue. It wasn't. $12,400 was shocking. The larger pattern was heartbreaking, because the real theft wasn't financial. It was trust. Every time someone told me to stay quiet for the sake of family. Every time someone expected me to sacrifice while asking nothing from anyone else. Every time I was told I was overreacting. A little more trust disappeared. The night I walked into that kitchen, I thought I had discovered someone using my credit card. What I actually discovered was that I had been the only person treating my boundaries like they mattered. Once I finally stopped apologizing for protecting them, something unexpected happened. The people who truly cared about me stayed. The people who only benefited from my silence didn't. And that turned out to be the clearest difference between family by obligation and family built on respect. If there's one lesson I carried away from everything that happened, it's this. The moment someone tells you that being family means accepting behavior they'd never accept from you, they're not asking for love. They're asking for permission. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can ever say, even to family, is simply, no.